Good evening. My name is Robert W. Grier Jr., and I am a writer. In the days of old, people would tell stories, and that's what I'm going to do today. It's a story I wrote years ago. It was in a book of short stories. The name of the story is The Facts Pertaining to the Watermelon Seed Spitting Contest of Washaba County. Page 1. Fly spitting has always been held in some high regard in my family. Laugh not, my reader. Some families point to their dust-free trophy cases and recant the touchdown pass little Johnny of the Silver Spoon clan threw during the big state championship game with 6 seconds to go. Not my family. Zippo of us won a Nobel Peace Prize. None hit the game-winning three-pointer, and we'd rather skip discussions revolving around how many times those of my blood have struck out with 3 on in the ninth. But, and I say with absolutely no embarrassment, mind you, we are the damnedest best fly-spitting family to have ever graced the pathways that God sets. Our reign, it started with my great-great-great-grandfather, Ernesto Ian, to be precise, and maybe for this official type record I should try being precise. Sounds funny though, doesn't it? He being Ernesto, even though my family is 100% Choctaw right down to the family tomahawk. It sits on my dusty mantle right now. And Ernesto didn't look much like a Choctaw neither when he was a young man around the turn of the 20th century. He easily being the fattest man in Washaba County and all. Hell, I've got a picture in the family scrapbook, well, more of a panorama to be precise. And if he'd donned a 50-feather headdress and snatched up that old tomahawk, there'd still be a parcel of land in western Pennsylvania that was considered savage land, a scrap of acreage not to be entered by civilized Europeans at any cost. Now, old G to the third power Grandpa Ernesto wasn't considered good for much, excepting leftover patrol. But by some blessing, he was able to get himself hitched up to G to the third power Grandma Guthrie. Parentheses, in Indian lore, she's often referred to as one who sleeps with fat groundhog, end parentheses. The two of them settling on a strip of land near the end of the property where the reservation Small Creek empties into the Allegheny River. It was getting on toward the middle of the summer of 1910 or 11 when G to the third power Guthrie hit her 8th month of pregnancy. Parentheses, and you better believe Ernesto heard it from Guthrie loudly. What, with that being one of the hottest summers on record and all. End of parentheses. That Ernesto made the faithful decision to waddle the 3/4 of a mile down Ellerberry Lane to the small leaning shack of the tribe's head medicine man, Jim. I kid you not, reader. He's recorded in the family scrapbook just as Jim. Though I suspect had his name been Jim of the soaring gale of the jubilant buzzard, it'd make my story have more of a red man kind of flavor. In Jim's leaning floored parlor, fat Ernesto sat for 3 hours, listening to tales of old, recanted between sips of cheap bourbon and the scent of corn cakes being baked. Through reddening eyes and an unsteady position on the brown couch, Jim listened as G to the third power Ernesto told of his life as a fat person, the humiliation of making his own clothes, of not being able to play with the other kids because he hadn't run since he was in diapers, of having to marry the fattest and ugliest squaw on the reservation because the skinny blind one was already pregnant. What Ernesto wanted more than anything else was a nimble on his feet son, a high stepper to be precise. And had it not been for the bourbon, old medicine man Jim may have given Ernesto just what he asked for. In fact, when the leg bone of the turkey Ernesto had slaughtered just for this occasion cracked and the small fire Jim had going, it did so very near the base, the fattest part of the bone. This is a good sign in Choctaw lore. Jim, parentheses, in full Choctaw headdress and rattling the tails of 2 timber rattlesnakes together, end parentheses, examined the bone and saw that the split had gone in a ring around the bone instead of cracking it lengthwise. Smiling through yellow teeth, he spoke that with that type of rupture, the sky was the limit for G to the third power Ernesto. Damn if he couldn't have asked for $1,000,000 and had a better than even shot at it. Or for the rolls of fat to be lifted from his body. But sweet fat Ernesto wasn't a selfish man. He had come to ask that his son not have to live the life he'd waddled through. And as a man, he was going to leave with that promise because the bones had cracked just right, and medicine man Jim was known to have favor with the gods. Did I mention the bourbon? Ernesto wasn't a man prone to the drink, breaking all Choctaw habits I know. And old Jim was a man of limited means who seldom had the pouch for liquid spirits. Hence, as they sat there with the cracked turkey bone between them, Ernesto either asked for a son who was a fly spitter, or was that what old Jim heard? The truth is always a bitter adversary, and when the drops of bourbon are included within the mix, the solution is diluted until the product of truth is a vapor that scatters upon the stiff breezes, blowing across the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Hands held high over his now drooping headdress, old Jim breathed forth the words, "Fly spitter," as he tapped the cracked bone upon Ernesto's meaty shoulder under the bright stars of a July night. And that was that. Within those bourbon-laced words, a blessing and a curse were cast upon the Ian tribe of western Pennsylvania that lives to this day. It weren't an easy road for that old blessing to hold, though. Oh, no. And when Ernesto's child was born a month later, that child was heaved through Boulder fat and as lacking in a penis as the Virgin Mary. G to the third power Grandma Guthrie was just pleased as punch, mind you. Girls in the Choctaw tribe tend to be the best workers. But Ernesto wasn't at all pleased with the gods who give wind, fire, and rain. On that night he took the bone that had cracked so perfectly, walked past his roly-polar daughter as she farted in her sleep, and prepared to throw it as far into the greenery of the woods as a man with a weak arm can throw. But alas, the bone wasn't really that old, and if he boiled it down with a little pork fat and made some egg yolk noodles, it'd do nicely as a post-midnight snack. Great-great-grandmother Charlotte nailed her first fly when she was 6 years old. Rolling some tiny pebbles around on their small front porch, she was reciting the alphabet as G to the third power Guthrie had taught her, while Ernesto lay on the couch just inside the door and listened to the product of his sweaty passions. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, K, L, N, and O. Parentheses, this is where kids usually get bogged down. P. Then it happened. And had Ernesto been a thinner man, he could have bolted up on the couch and seen it transpire through the window. But he wasn't. And as G2 Charlotte sucked that airy mucus from her nose down into her mouth with a sound only someone with a gangbanger of a nasal infection, or a true fly spitter, can make, he grunted with the effort. Then, hark tooey! It went from between her sweet chubby lips, landing with such force on the old wooden porch that to Ernesto it sounded like a huge hand clap echoing within the Alleghenies Valley. By the time he got outside, followed closely by G to the third power Guthrie, parentheses, who'd heard the sound all the way from the kitchen, and parentheses, Charlotte was once again merely rolling the small pebbles. But off to her side, near the steps, sat a puddle of mucus and saliva. Dead center in the glue, lying on its back, wiggled a greenback woods fly of some size and girth. Mother Guthrie placed her hand on Charlotte's soft shoulder and smiled down on her daughter as Charlotte smiled up at her. Ernesto, not having told his bride of the cracking of the bone or of Jim's misunderstanding with the gods, eased his large foot over and smeared the remnants of the puddle and the green-backed woods fly until they were but a memory to blend within the pine boards forever. Now old G3 Ernesto was a fat man with an uncommon sense of pride. Had it not been for this, he might have gone ahead and told his wife of his time with inebriated Jim and of the misspoken blessing. But instead of coming clean, he spent the next 2 years close upon the heels of his daughter Charlotte. Though they now had 3 children to feed, it wasn't uncommon to see fat Ernesto clumsily following his chubby daughter to school, to play, to the outhouse. And in all instances, he seemed to have a red bandana that looked the worse for wear between his hands, as though those hands sweated a river. It wasn't until she was 8 and the incident transpired that fat Ernesto came clean, so to speak. It was a beautiful June day. One of those in Pennsylvania where the sun sits above the mountains like a blazing torch, hell-bent on scorching all that try to live within its light. Little, parentheses, based on age, mind you, Charlotte had waddled into town with a few of her friends. And if Ernesto hadn't partaken of quite so much of Grandma Guthrie's Washaba County award-winning strawberry cobbler, he'd have been there to disrupt the incident prior to its inception. And it also should be noted, had snotty little Amos Struff not parked his damnable Model T next to Bertrand Handum's butcher shop, the event wouldn't have transpired either. See, Bertrand was no keeper of a sanitary establishment, and the flies that accumulated just outside the whitewashed door lined up like an infantry division hell-bent on a frontal assault every time that cowbell jingled. Ernesto, waking and realizing his daughter had beaten a path into town, paced himself as best he could down the dirt roadway till he arrived at the outskirts and saw a group out front of Bertrand Handum's establishment. It wasn't a mass, so to speak, more of a circle that surrounded Snotty Struff's Model T. And dead center in the middle was his oldest. She had done taken to putting her hands behind her back and was jettisoning the spit gloves into the air with such force the locals seemed to suck in a breath with her every loogie. And the windshield. Lordy be if there wasn't more than 40 and less than a zillion flies plastered against the once clean glass. As he watched, through large as saucer eyes, she pegged a good-sized common housefly that had tried to sprint past her to the door, landing the poor creature upon the back portion of the driver's seat. It was then that Ernesto realized the windshield wasn't the only backdrop to the cold-blooded murder that was taking place. Large spit puddles were searing in the hot sun on both seats in the vehicle, on the driver's side door, and the right headlight looked as though it had been doused with a bucket. And in every landed loogie, a fly. Cleaning the vehicle with a bucket of soapy water a short time later, Ernesto explained to his daughter of her gift and tried to explain it to Snotty Struff as well. The young man truly wanted to hear none of it, though, and rumor has it he sold the vehicle that evening in Pittsburgh before news of its recent damnation could be broadcast. Charlotte, the recipient of many name-calling incidents from that day forward, gave up her days of fly spitting in public. Mind you, she still possessed a rare talent and wasn't willing to let it dwindle. But from that day forward, none of Washaba County ever saw her lance a fly with a well-fired spittle missile. Left to her own, though, she honed her gift like a musketeer hones his sword. Butterflies were far too difficult because they flew in haphazard patterns, and she reckoned she didn't care to moisten a butterfly anyway. Moths flew when it was dark, and her eyesight didn't give her a good view of that target. Bumblebees became an obsession for a few days, but with their size, only a direct hit would wound them down, leaving you with a thoroughly upset, stinging creature that would hide in the grass until it had dried its wings enough to ease it behind you and deliver a nice payback. Mosquitoes were too small to get a good view, and the one time she got close enough to a hummingbird, well, who knew hummingbirds flew in packs? In the end, it was flies that interested G2 Charlotte. And in her brief sojourn here on planet Earth, there wasn't one that eluded her aim once she set her mind to pegging them. All good lives still come to an end, though. Guthrie and Ernesto departed before the Japanese dropped an explosive loogie on Pearl Harbor. G2 Grandma Charlotte got herself hitched to a hard-working coal miner just prior to the war, and before he died on some forgotten isle in the Pacific, they had 2 children, both of them boys. The family history went to the oldest of them, my great-grandfather Matthew. It was on a cold spring day that G2 Charlotte told Matthew of his gift. He truly wanted a big red ball, one of those that was made of thick elastic and could be used for a kick or dodgeball with equal ease. Eyes drooping, he received the news that he was blessed with the ability Medicine Man Jim had given to the Ian portion of the Choctaw tribe. Once enabled with the news, G2 Charlotte led his slightly to the rear frame to the outhouse and threw open the door with such delicacy. The flies that perpetually seemed to cling to the inside of the door barely moved. With pride in her thrown-out chest, G to the second power Charlotte watched, while Matthew, parentheses, leaning back and sucking hard on his nasal cavities, end parentheses, attempted his first fly spit. He'd chosen a large house fly that was head high to himself, a big fellow that clung to the door in an upside down position, as though watching for any spiders that might jump. The green glob landed on his shirt. He looked sideways to G to the second power Charlotte, who merely nodded her head in understanding and took to watching his chosen fly again. Then, with resolve rarely found within the soul of a 5-year-old boy, Matthew reared back and sucked upon his upper respiratory system like a demonically possessed child. Dragging backwards so hard against his navel cavity, he felt a booger slide into the loogie. He jettisoned his head forward with the knowledge that the weight of the booger might be enough to take out that upside-down fly. It took 2 washings and a fair amount of Charlotte's elbow grease to get that booger stain out of Matthew's shirt. The knowledge that the family's gift ended with her was somewhat distressing for Charlotte. And as she eased back out to the outhouse, parentheses, after promising G1 Matthew the red ball, end parentheses, and she dropped those outhouse flies with the same passion Babe Ruth felt when he hit fastballs or Red Grange flared when he saw an opening in the middle and the end zone in sight. But she did so through salty tears. Eager reader, you have been quite faithful in your gaining of knowledge to this point. And if you'll indulge in Old Fart Choctaw for but a few moments longer, I promise to get back to the Ian tribe of the Pennsylvania Choctaws. But first I must tell you of the Everly family and their predominance in the Washaba County Fair's watermelon seed spitting contest. Funny brood, the Everlys. Rumor in these parts is that they were the earliest settlers here, that the original Everlys came across on the Pinto, the one that docked just after the Mayflower. That'd make them amongst the earliest settlers in the New World, and you better believe they damn sure knew it. Of course, they were a few thousand years behind the Choctaws, and every true Indian crossed his eyes when they went off on their earliest settlers tangent. Now, the Everlys possessed a rare talent for making money, and in Washaba County they are also the richest family. Big white mansions that dot the landscape are in no need of a name on the mailbox. And it was the Everlys who brought the watermelon seed spitting contest to the Washaba County Fair somewhere around the turn of the 20th century. Said it was a tradition from the old country. Parentheses, appropriate eyeball rolling from the Indians on that one, end parentheses. And the rules has originally been transcribed onto a piece of parchment paper during the Dark Ages. For all anyone in Washaba County Fair knew, they could have been handed down from Moses to the 12 apostles, the site of incoming seed spewed forth by Simon Peter and John the Baptist out in the deserts of the Middle East. But at the fair, the rules were set forth as such. All contestants were to have 1 watermelon seed. All contestants were to launch that seed from a common line, and the seed had to be engraved with a symbol that was also common to the spitter's hand. These were the rules, and as the second decade of the 20th century approached, the record for Everly victories in the great contest was whatever and 0. Mind you, there have been some good matches over the 100 years. Matches like in 1946, when a stiff breeze forced the seeds to labor. The broad seeds the Everlys are so fond of, threatening to become like kites and float backwards. Or in 1975, when a thunderstorm brought huge droplets that forced the seeds down prematurely. In 88, a kid from Moon brought an extremely promising seed he swore came from a melon that weighed in at slightly over 100 pounds. And wasn't he quite the promising act too? Literally raced up to the line like a man trying to finish first in the galloping from a lion contest. Jettison that seed like the Saturn rocket jettisoned the Apollos and finished second to Spindly Wilbur Everly. Mind you, that didn't surprise no one. Wilbur is the keeper of the special seed of the Everly clan. I kid you not, eager reader, the special seed is precisely that, a special seed. There might be 5 Everlys in the contest each year, and they all might have seeds that look just alike. But that seed, what wouldn't a resident of Washaba County give up for that baby? As I've already stated, great-grandfather Matthew didn't receive the gift. Nor did he give 2 shakes out of a give a shit shaker about it. But he did have that big red ball until he was 11, and it got itself tangled in a patch of blackberry briars that were red with age. His daughter, though, my sweet dear mother, is she not within herself a gift? The sweetness of her plentiful hugs, the joy in her smile, the taste of the black raspberry pie that she creates from scratch. Parentheses, if you're willing to pick the berries, and parentheses. So very fast with a laugh, and so very slow with a backhand for a misbehaving child. She is as the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets that circle our globe. She is the constant, the perpetual. And she can nail any unsuspecting horsefly from upwards of 10 feet away without the need of any added nasal concoctions. Laugh not. I've seen her do it. And as the heavens are my witness, you truly begin to feel a sense of sorrow for the flies. Many is the time when we've gathered on the unscreened porch off the front of her and father's home and tasted the delight of her red raspberry pie, washed down with coffee or chocolate milk. All of us regaling in the stories of old, the tales of things yet to pass. Long litanies spewed forth with passion about the history of our noble ancestors. And then, zappo! Down goes the metamorphosizing maggot into a spittle of purplish saliva. It's truly quite the sight, but one that we were not to speak of outside of our little family unit. In fact, the truth of the Ian's blessing had been lost to those outside the tribe, lost to legend, as surely as the beasts that roam the seas have been lost. It's just a story to outsiders, a long ago tale about those crazy Indians. A time when a Model T had taken an unprecedented amount of abuse. The special seed came out today. In the era of cell phones, text messaging, and the internet, you'd have thought a thing like a watermelon seed spitting contest would have lost its luster. Mind you, not the whole of the county cares these days, but a great many do. And those who do care, they care a great deal. In fact, over the last 2 decades, so many have joined the activity that it takes 2 rounds to determine a winner. The top half of the finishers in the first round hawk off against the top half of the spitters in the second round to determine who gets the small trophy. Parentheses, a base, a wider section shaped like the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, with a small watermelon seed fashioned on top, end parentheses, and the $100 cash prize. A county fair in the Midwest is a sight to behold, in and of itself, noble one. And if one were to try and place western Pennsylvania within the realm of the eastern states, they'd best be prepared for a geography lesson and an explanation of the Western Reserve in the history of America. At the Washaba Fair, little ones could easily have smeared upon their jubilant faces the remnants of orange cotton candy, watermelon, ketchup from a hot dog, chocolate from a homemade ice cream cone, and what kid can leave the fair without a glob of taffy stuck in their hair? Tents of every shape and size dot the rolling landscape. Barkers of the same size. Ferris wheels, spider arm contractions that make old ladies laugh, and children who shouldn't be allowed to wash themselves for fear of drowning, tossing darts at unprotected balloons. This is a Midwest fair. And smack in the middle, at the grandstands, the watermelon seed spitting contest takes place at 4 o'clock on Saturday, just before the demolition derby. Happens every year. And this year, as an added special to the Washaba Fair, they're going to have the souped up lawnmower pole after old cars with young drivers bash themselves quite friggin' silly. I never received the gift. So damn few really have. Only Charlotte and Mother, to be precise. And with Mother fairly bedridden these days, it will die with her? Those thoughts crept upon me as I lined up to watch round number 1 at 4 o'clock this afternoon. The sight of my oldest, Anita, within the ranks of the spitters, bringing my chest slightly farther forward. Did she have a shot? Looking at her 10-year-old frame, surrounded by the 20 or so experienced spitters lined up along the nylon rope, I tried to believe she did. She'd been doing a study, you see. Been doing it since last year when she'd watched the excitement with me. Watermelon seeds begin as moist creatures, but over time they dry out and become quite light in weight. To spit one with any distance, you need the added weight of a moist seed. So over the years, those in the contest have used many tactics to enhance the weight of their seeds. But, and this is the part that ruined any chances the man with the soldering gun had when he loaded the seed with solder, the seed has to be light enough to catch the air currents and glide down that dirt-floored grandstand like a massive ship on an ocean's gale. Parentheses. Rumor has it Solder Boy spent 3 days in a Pittsburgh clinic being treated for metal poisoning, end parentheses. After spending many an hour studying, Anita decided the best possible solution to soak her seed in contained vinegar, a ground-up antacid, and grape Kool-Aid. She'd put a good-sized fella in that concoction 3 days ago, held down with a small rock from the Allegheny, and 1 hour before the contest, she pulled it out. Then, with flair, she etched an AN on the seed with my Dremel. And now, from the nylon rope spitting zone, she pulled it from the cotton encased inside of a matchbox and placed it within her lips. Ready? Set, spit! They were all so much bigger than my sweet Anita Noble reader. What chance did she really have? Is that not the fear of all parents? That our daughter is not pretty enough to make the cheerleading squad? Or our son is going to get squashed by the huge kids he has to try and tackle as they break through the line? It's the disappointment that breaks our hearts. And is not that a bitter pill that tasted even worse than when we first realized our own disappointments? Consolation speech already written within the backdrop of my mind, I watched those seeds take to the humid air of a Pennsylvania summer. Watched them glide as though they a flock of crows that circle the ruined cornfield when the farmer's truck is gone and the scarecrow's lost an arm due to the wind. She came to me when the seeds had landed, as my arms went around her in understanding. The heavyset judge yelled off the abbreviations of the seeds. AN was read off in the 8th spot, and my chin is still sore from where she jumped. The second line of spitters came now to the fore as the sound of a derby car farting to life encompassed the north end of the field. It sputtered out again. Anita tore from my arms and raced, while putting her seed back in its home, to the line of watchers along the track the seeds would be taking. This was a group of Wilbur Everly. And what a sight he was to those of us mere mortals along the seed-spitting pathway. The man was at least 6 feet 6 inches tall and so thin you'd have thought he the employee at the green olive factory who had to pull the pimentos through. He wore a gray double-breasted suit, and the man had his red tie pulled all the way up, even though it had to be 95 degrees within the grandstand. Reaching down with his right hand, he withdrew the special seed from the shiny oak box like it was the Medal of Honor, and he'd be placing it upon his chest just pretty as you please. We all watched him, mind you. Watched not because the other 19 or so contestants in this round were merely also ran